right, this is the second part of the version A CBA practice. This is the one we did in class in case you missed or you just wanted to hear how to do the problems again. I'm going to skip down to number 8 just like we did in class. First of all, let's figure out what type of problem it is. It's obviously a quadratic because it says solve the following quadratic. That does not mean you have to use quadratic formula. In fact, you have a couple options to try. Number 1, always check to see if you could factor it. Number 2, check to see if you could complete the square. And number 3, if all else fails, quadratic formula is here to the rescue. You can always use that. Now, for this one, only one of those is actually going to work. All right, but first of all, we got to get it to equal 0. That's your problem with every single one of these is that you have to get it to equal 0 first. So let's move that 6 on over to the other side. Pretty easy fix. 3x squared minus 8x plus 6 is what it says now, and it still equals 0. Good. All right, well, can I factor it? Well, no. The big issue here is that 3 in front of the x squared. As soon as you see that, automatically factoring is out because we didn't teach you how to factor with a 3 in front. It's also going to eliminate complete the square because we did not teach you how to complete the square when there's something in front of x squared. We only taught you how to use that with quadratic formula. Hopefully you know the quadratic formula. If not, you need to memorize it. It's negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, memorize it. Know it. Have it in your brain. Figure out what each letter is. A is the one attached to x squared, so that's 3. B is the one attached to x, which is negative 8. And C is the one that's off by itself, which is 6. All right, well, let's start plugging in. Negative b is going to become negative 8. Just filling in my numbers that I had over there. Negative 8 squared minus 4 times 3 times 6 all over 2 times 3. All right, so that's your starting form of your equation. And again, pause, rewind, stop whenever you need to. Get this down or go back and hear more. That's why it's a video for you. All right, we'll do the next step in red. Negative 8 is going to become positive 8. In the square root, negative 8 squared is positive 64. Minus 4 times 3 times 6. 4 times 3 is 12. 12 times 6 is 72. And then it's all over 6. All right, let's continue in green. We are now down to 8 plus or minus the square root of negative 8. Yes, there's a negative in there. Don't panic. It's going to be all right. All over 6. Well, this negative 8, I cannot simplify until I do jailbreak. So let's get that out of the way. Hopefully that's definitely reviewed because we've been doing that for a while. And then there's a negative 1 there. Because there's a negative in the square root, you're automatically going to have what letter? That's right. I is going to be in the problem. So next step, we'll put in blue. So we have 8 plus or minus. Take out the 2's. They become 2i square root of 2 all over 6. Now normally we would stop here, but actually because we have a fraction, we should check to see if we can reduce. Now you do not reduce the things inside the square root. So that 2 in there is going to stay there no matter what. So I'm actually going to rewrite it over here. But the 8, the 2 in the front, and the 6 can all divide by 2. So let's do that. 8 divided by 2 is 4. Plus or minus 2 divided by 2 is 1. So the I is going to be there. And then 6 divided by 2 is 3. And you got your final answer. Sorry, I got a little bit squished over there, but it says 4 plus or minus I square root of 2 over 3. And there's your answer for that problem. Moving on down to number 9, still leaving number 7. Number 9, you are going to have to complete the square. All right, so a little bit more work for this one, I'm going to be honest. I know a lot of you guys don't feel super comfortable with complete the square, but you should know how to do it. And in fact, for this one, it tells you to do it that way. So let's get going on that. First of all, move that 5 on over. Easy first step. So we have x squared plus 18x plus 57 now equals 0. Okay? Now the reason we taught you guys to complete the square is because it's a good thing to use when you can't factor. Alright, so if I cannot factor 57 to get to 18, I'm going to need to fill in a number there that will. I can't get rid of my 57 though, so I got to rewrite it. And I got to have another blank to counteract the first one I'm going to do. Okay, because whatever I add in that first blank, I'm going to have to subtract to make it balanced on that side of the equation. Now we had a formula for that. It was b over 2 squared to figure out what goes in our two blanks. Well, the b in this formula is 18. If I divide 18 by 2, I'll get 9. 9 squared is 81. Alright, that's going to be the perfect number to use for factoring in this problem. So I'm going to just put it right in the first make it positive. If I'm going to add 81, I'm also going to have to subtract 81. You can't just randomly add things to your equations. You have to balance it. Alright, if I did it correctly, this should be a lovely, lovely section to factor. So go ahead and factor it. What two things multiply to 81, but also add to 18? Okay, well, if I'm going to be completing the square, it actually has to be the same number. Well, what number times itself is 81? It's 9. Does 9 plus 9 equal 18? Yeah, it does. So that's actually the factored form of that box I just drew. Now, x plus 9 times x plus 9, I can actually shrink down to x plus 9 squared. That's why it's called complete the squares, because you're actually making something squared. Now, I can't just ignore these numbers off to the side. They're going to have to drop down with these as well. Positive 57 minus 81 gives me negative 24. And again, down here I need to write it. Now, this would be lovely if it was done right now, but the problem says solve the quadratic by completing the square, which means I have to actually get x by itself. So I'm going to move this guy over here and continue to solve. I have x plus 9 squared minus 24 equals 0. I got to get rid of that squared, which means eventually I'm going to have to take the square root, but I can't do that until it's by itself. So we need to move 24 to the other side. Get rid of that. Now I've got x plus 9 squared by itself, because 24 is on the other side. So now I can take the square root. Remember our little phrase, I made a root, plus or minus, has to go along with it. That means this is x plus 9, because that's going to cancel out on that side. Got to do a little jailbreak for my 24. The 2's are going to break out. 3 and 2 are going to remain inside, so we get a 6 in there. So 2 squared is 6, and there should be a plus or minus, so I almost forgot. Alright, we still have to move this 9 over to the other side. Very, very last step to get x by itself. Subtract 9. You can't combine 9 and 2. You can't combine 9 and square root of 6. So it actually just gets written at the very front. Just move everything over a little bit and slot that negative 9 right in. There you go. Here's your answer. Alright, now the reason I skipped number 7 is because I want you to figure out which one of these types of ways do you know least. Okay? Which one are you less comfortable with? Are you less comfortable with quadratic formula, or are you less comfortable with complete the square? Because whichever one you're less confident with, you probably need a little bit of practice. Okay? So if you feel like you need more practice with quadratic formula, you're going to do quadratic formula for number 7. If you feel like you need more practice with complete the square, you're going to do complete the square for number 7. Alright? Now, I'm not going to do both of them, but I do have both of them on the key that is attached to this announcement on Google Classroom. So feel free to go take a look at that to get an idea of what steps you need to complete in order to solve this problem. But just for time's sake, I'm just going to let you know that the answer should be D, and you need to try it out on your own. All right, and I'm going to skip down to number 10 because a lot of us did not get time in class to really work on that. All right, so number 10, okay? This is actually mistyped. This is supposed to be the letter Y, so if you got very confundeled when you did this, it's probably because of that reason. All right, when we have two equations like this, we just recently learned or relearned about substitution. Substitution is where you replace something with something else. If this is equal to Y, I'm going to replace Y here with that. So down here I'm going to have x squared plus 6x plus 6. Still have the rest of that stuff to include, minus x equals 6. Okay, well now this actually looks pretty similar to some of the stuff we had up above, which means you can either factor, complete the square, or do quadratic formula. So let's figure out what's going to work for this one. I can combine these two things, so I have x squared plus 5x plus 6 equals 6. Got to get it to equal 0 first, so don't you dare start factoring yet. Move that 6 on over. And you might notice something kind of strange happens. On both sides, our 6 cancels out, and we have x squared plus 5x equals 0. Okay, well, there are two ways you can deal with this. You can either just take it as is and start simplifying it, or you can try and factor it. Both ways are going to be pretty equal. If I have x squared and 5x, I really don't have to worry about factoring or complete the square or quadratic formula because they have something in common. What do x squared and 5x have in common? They have an x, which means I could take an x out of both of them, just like a number. If they had a 2 in front of them, I could take out a 2. So let's divide out an x, my bad. X squared divided by x is going to leave me with 1x. 5x divided by x is going to leave me with 5. And it still equals 0. Okay, and I'm going to put parentheses around this to help us remember that that is a group unto itself. And I can solve it now. X equals 0 from right there. X plus 5 has to equal 0, so I have to do a little bit of solving for that one. That means that x really equals negative 5. Okay? Alternative route you could do to do the same thing. If you really like factoring, the reason you can't factor this currently is because there's no number there. So add a 0. That's really what's there, is a plus 0. Okay, and then figure out what two numbers multiply to equal 0, but also add to equal 5. Well, obviously 0 has to be one of them. And that means that 5 has to be the other one. 0 times 5 is 5. 0 times 5 is 0. 0 plus 5 is 5. And it's actually pretty similar to what we did over here. X plus 0 would then be 0. X plus 5 would also equal 0, and you get x equals 0, x equals negative 5. Okay, two ways to do it. You could have also done quadratic formula or complete the square. It's just really not that ideal because there's a simpler way to do it. Now, either way you do it, you still have to solve for y. So let's scroll back on up here. I'm going to pick the second equation. That one's pretty easy. Y minus x equals 6. All right, well, let's solve for our x values then. When x is 0, it's going to look like that, which means y is actually 6. All right, well, that wasn't too bad. Same equation, but now we're plugging in negative 5. Y minus negative 5 equals 6. Y plus 5 equals 6. Subtract 5. That means when when x is negative 5, y is 1. That means my 2 points are 0, 6, and negative 5, 1. Let's go back up here and find those answers. Right there. There's your answer.